It is truly one of the best songs I've heard myself. It's really beautiful. All right, our last reader, Lily Lewis. Lily Lewis is a warrior against ignorance and injustice, both in the classroom and in the community. Her novel, The Last Mermaid Princess, is a semi-autobiographical account of an unusual set of circumstances and events. Please welcome Lily.
Well, I'm going to pull this up a little higher. I thought I would begin today by reading the prologue, which I think is a pretty good explanation of what I have going on here. The book is formatted in a way so that each little mini, I wouldn't call them chapters, they're little vignettes and little pieces that have song titles for the beginnings. And they start out as I'm a child, growing up in Amarillo, Texas, in the Texas Panhandle. And my parents at that time were a mixed marriage. My father was from Bangkok, Thailand, and my mother was from a small farming community in the Texas Panhandle outside of Clarendon. I don't know if any of you have passed through that on the way to somewhere else. And so it was a very unlikely match. But during the time period that we're talking about, it was also just not done. So it made things difficult, I think, as I was growing up. And to make matters worse, there were things in the family and in the community both that were quite toxic. A lot of addiction and alcoholism and family dysfunction, family violence and abuse, community hypocrisy and racism, and the treatment of women during that time was just atrocious. And we're talking the 60s and 70s. I think you hear it in the news today. So many things that we're pointing to and saying this is not okay, and we're calling it out. But back in the 60s, it was a don't tell kind of situation where you knew that these things went on, but you didn't say anything about it. It was taboo to even bring up, to broach that subject. So I'm going to talk about that a little bit in this book, so that I think if there were a takeaway that we could say that I was hoping for, and I embellished parts and made a Hollywood version where some of it is not true, but the point, I think, of it is that we're all very complex individuals, and that we're each trying to be the best version of ourselves that we can be, and we're each trying to lead our best life. But it's difficult sometimes when things around us are not as they should be. These things can be damaging and disabling, and that we have to try to get through them. And although there's not necessarily a happy ending and they all lived happily ever after kind of thing, there is hope that we will continue getting up every morning and making our best effort to learn from mistakes and to do better and to be healthy and happy and help others to do the same. So I'm going to begin with the prologue. It says, I am 60 years old, and for the life of me, I cannot imagine 61. I have always had a plan, a short-term plan for the day or week, and a long-term plan for 3 years or 5 years or even a 10-year stretch of time. I sit in a circle at my weekly Codependence Anonymous meeting. Hello, my name is Lily, and I am a proud member of the worldwide family of Al-Anon. I repeat the one day at a time mantra with no real understanding of how to actually get through just one day at a time. and no thought of how I'm even going to get on to the next day. A few days later, I fumble with little post-it notes where I have scribbled thoughts and feelings from the week and turn to my therapist and I say, if I have to imagine it before I can make it happen, then I cannot imagine anything more. It's as if my whole life is in the rear view mirror and I'm just coasting along all Thelma and Louise style, right up to the cliff's edge. There's always a silence after I make a pronouncement such as this. She's really good at hitting the pause button. It's as if she's waiting for me to hear my own words and suddenly have some epiphany or light bulb moment that will enable me to move forward. We just look at each other and I wonder if I should focus on her face or look away or change the subject or what. Her therapy dog, Maddie, with the horrible breath, groans and shifts positions on the couch beside me. For the longest time, I believed I was a smart and talented individual who was completely devoted to my children. It was only after they were grown and gone that I came to realize I had been making myself feel whole through my exploitative relationship with them. My inability to craft my own identity was simply too formidable to overcome. In spite of it all, I loved them and did everything I could to give them health and happiness. Things like that are doomed to fail, and fail I did. After years of attempting to be the dutiful mother, I stumbled in ways that revealed how flawed I had been all along. I think the heart and the body are inextricably linked, so that if there is sickness in one, there will be sickness in the other. Now, sadness has squeezed at my heart, blinded my eyes, and twisted my bones. Make no mistake, we all get what we deserve, and I deserve every bit of the endless ennui that fills my days. I like to think of my suffering as atonement for my sins, retribution for my crimes against the ones I love. I have found ways to cut and bleed even without lifting a blade. Now miles separate us, thousands of miles, and visits are relegated to a week in the summer. How does one let go of the people that mean the most to them and define who they have always been? I realize that I have very little identity apart from them and no idea of how to create one. The thought of having everyone close so I could actually participate in their lives has been an impossible thing to give up or abandon. So here I am, waiting, believing that there might be a chance they will return. We always talked of going west, finding our place beside the big blue, dancing barefoot in the sand under a silent moon with the infinite power of the surf roaring in our ears. We felt it, calling in silent moments, stirring deep within, drawing us closer. I'd like to share something meaningful that I have harvested from the mad seasons, but I can't give you any answers. I can't tell you how to have a happy ending, but we do learn from the mistakes of others, so maybe you can learn from mine. If my story can serve as a cautionary tale to help others see something from a different perspective or avoid some similar fate, then that would be a terribly good thing indeed. Maybe I just need a little more time to figure out how to navigate these uncharted waters. I never learned how to swim, and that has impeded my ability to flow with the tides. If I could just learn to float or tread water, that would be a good start. But I flail about and gasp for air, and I pause and giggle at the absurdity of the whole spectacle, and then I continue the thrashing and splashing. I don't want to drown. I really don't. At least most days, I don't. I just keep trying to see the shore and to get to solid ground. So let me tell you how it all came to pass. My first taste of shame at the tender age of 5, and the years of guilt that sang to me with full-throated urgency, demanding attention, refusing to be silenced. At least I'm not so consumed by self-loathing or regret that I can't find some humor in it all. Sometimes the absolute madness makes for moments of breathless laughter and fearless abandon. I have accepted what I am, both good and bad. Maybe if I tell you this story, I can start to see 61. So the first part I wanted to share from the content of the book is an experience I had in elementary school in 1962, I think. It's a little bit to kind of show the marginalization of people of color. I was the only dark face in a sea of white, and it was painfully obvious to me much later why I was treated and excluded the way that I was. But I remember for most of my school experience, it never crossed my mind, the fact that I was a mixed ethnicity person, that could have been the root reason why I was always excluded and on the fringe. I never even thought about that. I thought of a million other things, but that didn't cross my mind. So this part is called Red Rover, Red Rover. Elementary school was like its own little microcosm, replete with different types of people, only in miniature. That's what I was told, but it was not true. I was the only caramel face in an ocean of vanilla. And as everyone knows, people can be cruel, especially children. The other children in the school seemed very different from me, but for some reason I could never put my finger on the exact reason why I stood apart so much. I only knew that I was the only little long-haired girl with the name that nobody could say. I sat in class with my attention drawn to my fingers as I pulled on the skin on the sides of my nails. Not bold enough to bite, I would pick until I would bleed. That just about sums up my entire childhood experience, chronically torn and bloody. It was the first day of school in 1962, and Mrs. Winkle was my first grade teacher. She was tall and thin, with short dark hair and very white skin. I wondered what she did to be so white. I liked her because she spoke softly most of the time, unlike the loud, shrill, flat sounds that billowed out of the mouths of my fellow classmates. Thinking back, I'm not sure if it was their redneck hillbilly words or their thick Texas accents that grated on me the most. But soon it was time for lunch, and Mrs. Winkle, she smiled as students shuffled to line up at the door. "Lily, which line do you belong in, honey?" she said. I had not been listening to instructions. I had been lost in her face. "Come over to this line if you're in the Catholic, and go over to that line over there by the door if you're a Protestant," she repeated. I just stood there, staring at my pink, tattered fingers. "Lily, sweetie, you need to get in line. We're ready to go. Everybody is ready to eat, and you are making us late," she explained with a hint of impatience in her voice. I didn't know what to do. I had no idea what the difference was between Catholic and Protestant and whatever else she had said about fish and Friday and I was so embarrassed that everybody else seemed to know but me. I had never heard those words before. Maybe I didn't understand much of the language my father spoke, but I didn't understand much of this language either. So I did what any other 6-year-old in a pickle would do. I chose the line with the friendliest looking and least hostile looking group of people that I could find. They were in the fish line. So every Friday that year, I ate with the Catholics. And since I was fairly fed up with fish by the time school was out for summer, when 2nd grade rolled around, I got into the Protestant meat line. "You can't be over here. You're in the wrong line. Go over there," shouted a freckled, red-haired girl when I first made the move to switch teams. She was just not having it. "Teacher, Lily is in the wrong line. Make her go over to the other side," whined a snot-crusted boy with dirty fingernails and yellow teeth that looked like corn. "Young lady, you, hey you, girl with the long hair. I can't pronounce your name. It's foreign, isn't it? Oriental, maybe? They call you Lily? Are you in the right place? Are you a Protestant? You can't just change lines if you're supposed to be in the other one," exclaimed my new abrasive 2nd grade teacher. She spoke too loudly and stood too closely, and her breath smelled like my wet poodle. She also taught PE and was rumored to paddle people on their birthday until they cried. Horror of horrors, I was terrified of her. I longed for sweet, soft Mrs. Winkle, and I didn't know what to do, so I just stood there trying to summon a little bit of Jackie Kennedy or Audrey Hepburn or something, but ended up coming off more like a cardboard cutout or statue. "Okay, just go on then. But I'm going to check with your mother to see if you were in the wrong line or where you're supposed to be. Someone your age ought to know these things." Regretfully, she did indeed inquire with my mother, who probably gave the speech about being in an interracial marriage with a Buddhist. She was probably shocked because he was probably the only Buddhist in Texas in 1963. So that certainly did not help me fit in. The teacher simply avoided me after that and let me go into whatever lunch line I wanted. But she did look at me occasionally if I were dirty or had some kind of cooties or something. It wasn't until much later that I figured out the secret that everybody else already knew. There was no right line for me, and there was no seat at the table. Okay, so I had those types of things to deal with, but at home I had challenges that were in many ways a lot larger, because with the school thing, that's an external kind of thing that you can come home and tell a supporting family about it, and they say and do the right things to kind of help you get through it. But I did not have that family, so here's a little excerpt from page 30 called "Moonlight Bay" from the Bing Crosby song, 1966. The police were regular guests at my house, and it seemed like they came more when the weather was warmer and when there was a full moon. I have heard that hot places like Arizona have higher rates of murder and other violent crimes. Maybe my mom got all stirred up because she was hot. My dad made frequent visits to the backyard where he would turn on the water hose and spray the evaporative air conditioner pads to cool off the house, and especially to cool off my mom. She liked to carry knives around and show them to you in furtive, sneaky little glimpses with a crazy glitter in her eyes. Sometimes she would lift up her pant leg or even her dress to show that she had a knife stuck in her shoe or sock or even rolled up in her girdle. People wore girdles back in those days. She just showed you it was there, and then she carefully replaced her clothing. When she lost control, and I mean really lost it, we all knew the police would soon be on their way. My sister and I would go out to the backyard and sit on the swings or disappear across the street to Karen and John's house to watch TV and hide out. I never went alone. I would just try to be invisible. And while my sister lived with us, that was our go-to place. Karen and John were sort of Maud, since she wore white go-go boots. And he had a leather jacket that was sort of like a vest with fringe and beads. It was the 60s, and the hippie thing in Amarillo did get off to a slow start, but they were a little bit ahead of the curve in other ways. They knew something bad was going down at my house because the police would show up at some point, and then everyone on the block knew Joanne and Charlie were at it again. I remember one particularly bad episode when my mom went crazier than usual. She had already pulled out the knives, waved them around at everybody, and even feebly tossed a few in my dad's direction. He cursed at her and tried to grab her by the wrist. He told her to stop acting crazy in front of the kids, and he said he would just leave if she did not calm down. She did what anybody in that situation would do. There had to be a sacrifice, a murder. She sat down on our living room sofa, grabbed one of those knives, and made one violent stab into the back of the couch. Next, she proceeded to grab the material and rip and tug until large pieces of the sofa tore off in chunks. Then she plunged both hands inside the couch and pulled out all the stuffing and threw it in the air so it looked like it was snowing. By the time she was finished, the sofa was bare to the springs with tapestry and cotton polyester in piles, mountains of debris all over the room. The final act was to grab a large mirror off the wall and hurl it towards the television while screaming something about not getting any attention and that my dad would have to listen if he had no TV. Thank goodness she missed. And thank God he was quick to block the mirror because it was headed right for the table beside, which also had a lot of other things on it, kind of like a death frisbee or a missile. It surely would have shattered the screen and make no more Beverly Hillbillies or the Monkees for me. Police descended on our house, handcuffed my mother, and put her in the back of the police car. They called to my dad for a while and spoke to him to the side, said something about observing her in the hospital, but she promised to settle down, and after almost an hour, she was quietly picking up our sofa pieces and stuffing them all into paper grocery bags without saying a word. My dad came into the room with me and my sister. He locked the door behind him, and he took the twin bed next to mine without saying a word. It was over, at least that episode. Silence filled the room, and after a while, we heard my mom talking to someone, but we knew that no one was there. Okay, so are we, do we have any other time, or is that 20 minutes?
Yeah.
Do we know where we are?